YouTube, welcome back to my channel. Today we're here to talk about my May reading. I know this video is really late, but I filmed this video and was in the process of editing it a couple of weeks ago, and the file just got corrupted in some way, and so I'm here today to refilm my video where I talk about my May reading. It's been so long, so I'm not going to talk about these books at length. This is probably going to be the shortest wrap-up video I've ever done. In May, I read 16 books, and I've already spoken about 5 of them because they were books that I was reading in order to judge the nonfiction category of the BookTube Prize quarterfinals round. So I made a video where I talked about those 5 books at length. So just going to mention them today, as well as the other 9 books that I read. And the 5 nonfiction books that I read in order to judge the BookTube Prize were Underland by Robert McFarlane, Solitary by Albert Woodbox, How to Be an Antiracist by Ibram X. Kendi, Charged by Bbazelon, and Parkland by Cullen. I spoke about those books in a separate video. I'll link that down below. So if you haven't watched my video where I talked about my experience judging the nonfiction round of the BookTube Prize, you can go watch that video after this. The other 9 books. The first one that I read was The Girl with the Luteing Voice by Abigail. This is Abigail's debut novel. She's from Nigeria, and this story is about a young poor girl living in Nigeria who, because of her impoverished circumstances, she is almost sold into slavery. She's married off to an older man who abuses her, as well as his other wives abuse her, and when she is successful in escaping that circumstance, it's just to really put her in another circumstance where she's also being abused. And what's interesting about this story is that this young girl, although her mother instilled in her the desire to exert her own voice in the world, which is why it's called the Luteing Voice, she's abused by women who you would think would want to empower her and to protect her as she strives for her ambitions. It's very sad because of that. But there are also hopeful moments in this book because there are some good people who try to empower this young girl. So I really enjoyed this story. Very high rating for that one. The next 2 books that I read, I picked up off my shelves because of Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. In May, I wanted to read some books that were written by Asian authors. I picked whatever I had on my shelf. The first one that I finished was Waiting by Jin. This won the National Book Award in the United States a few years ago. But the story is set in China, and it's about a man who's in the army. He has a wife back home because his parents arranged a marriage for him. And while he's been married to this woman for a long time, they never really developed a stable relationship, and so now he has found someone else that he wants to be with, and he's trying to divorce his wife, but every time he returns home on leave to try to get his wife to divorce him, she successfully convinces him not this year. And so the story is about him waiting, and the woman that he is involved with otherwise also waiting, and his wife waiting. In this one, we also get a little cultural description. So we get to see how difficult it is to move from one relationship to the next, and you know, how the other people in the society, how the other people in the family think about you for wanting to go away from what your family desired. Very interesting read in that respect. I also read How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia by Mohsin Hamid, and this is a novel that is structured like a nonfiction self-help book. We're reading about a character who is pursuing his own dreams, his own ambitions, and it is written as though he is following the steps of a self-help financial book that will be telling you how to find success in your life. This was also really interesting. I liked the structure. I liked the fact that Hamid did something a little bit different with this one, so that was a really interesting read for me. I also read Little Gods by Ming Jen, and this one was not a title that I chose. It's a new release, and my buddy reader Columbus, he's Columbus here on YouTube, he chose this one, but I enjoyed it more than he did. The story is about a Chinese woman who is very talented in science. She's really good in physics. She gets a visa to come to the United States from China to study physics, but along the way she becomes a little discouraged by her experience, and so she spends, even though she has a daughter, she spends her time kind of telling her daughter education is not a valuable pursuit anymore, even though she has all this education. It's very interesting. When she dies, the daughter returns to China to try to uncover who her mother was, because she, you know, this woman, she definitely actively tried to move away from her identity. I I like the book because of its science terms. We have a woman physicist as a main character, or one of the main characters in the book, and I'm always interested to read about that. I also thought it was interesting that someone who had spent so much time and energy pursuing education would become so disenchanted. This mother felt very different and she acted very different. So I thought the book was really interesting. If you like books about science and books that incorporate science in fiction, you might like this one. I read a few books that came from publishers. Publishers asked me to review them. The first one was Carolina Breeze by Denise Hunter. This is the second installment in a series entitled A Bluebell Inn romance series. This series is about 3 siblings who their parents died right before they were able to finish restoring an inn, and so these 3 children trying to continue their parents' legacy. And in each one of the installments we see one of the siblings falling in love. So I like this series a lot. In this one we see the older sibling, the oldest sibling, who is the brother. He meets a movie star. She comes to stay in the inn, and of course they have their little time together, and it is wonderful. It's also Christian fiction, and so I like that. I really like how the author is able to incorporate these people living good morals, like they're living the Christian values without there being like a lot of biblical references. So even if you're not a fan of Christian fiction, like you're not a fan of biblical texts in books, this is still a really good book, just because we get to see these characters being kind and good and honest and, you know, high integrity, just because of what they believe in. So I thought that was really great. I also read The Opposite of Uncertainty, which is a memoir by Janine Urbaniak Reid, and this one is about, this is a memoir. Did I say that? This is nonfiction. This is a memoir. This is a mother of 3 children. One of her sons develops tremors, and they find out that he has a brain tumor that's causing these tremors. And this is about her, well, the family's struggle for a diagnosis and then for treatment, and what it means for their son moving forward. Really interesting, but also difficult to read, especially as the parent of a young child. Difficult to read about parents having that kind of a situation where they're faced with, you know, this kind of helplessness where their child gets sick and there's really not much that they can do. But it was a really interesting read. I thought this was really well written. I also read, in order to review this, another book by Thomas Nelson Publishers. This is Masquerade at Middlecrest, Abbey by Abigail Wilson. This was Regency romance. I don't think I've ever read a Regency romance before. The female main character is a single mother living at a time when being a single mother is definitely taboo. And so when we meet her, she's on her way to go try to get a job as a housekeeper. And her coach gets run over by a man who is a spy for the crown. But his identity is revealed to her. He is the brother of her child's father. So she doesn't want to tell him who she is. He doesn't want to tell her who he really is. And so they both have a secret from each other, and they're keeping secrets from the reader as well. So this is a little bit of intrigue and mystery, and it was really well written. This was my first Regency romance, and I definitely want to read more like that. We're back without the baby, and if you're wondering why, because her father came and took her. So back to the past. I also read another nonfiction book, and this one was The Genius of Birds by Jennifer Ackerman. This one I read just for my own enjoyment, because usually during the summer I'm able to do some hiking and bird watching, and this year I don't know if that's going to happen, so I wanted to read something about birds and just kind of live vicariously through the books. This one is Ackerman's attempt to debunk the myths about birds being brainless or small-brained. In this one, she presents the different ways that we could define intelligence and shows how birds have tendencies and inclinations that prove that they have a lot of those characteristics that we use to define smarts. I'm just fascinated by the things that I learned about birds in this one. Something as simple as homing, well, not simple. Homing pigeons have the ability to be released great distances away from their roost and be able to find their way to and from a location. I get lost in a city with a grid pattern, even armed with a map and GPS. So that directional ability by itself was fascinating, but there were just so many things in here that I didn't know about birds that I've learned, like that they have preferences for colors, that they like blue and they don't like red. Not all birds, of course, because there are cardinals who are red. But that, I don't remember the species now, but that there are some birds that if you put something in their nest that is red and they're not able to remove it physically, that they will bury it, that they will find other things to cover it up. They build these elaborate structures to lure the females, and I thought that this was just a fascinating presentation. Jennifer Ackerman is not a bird scientist herself, and in here she presents research from various ornithologists around the world, and I thought that this was a really great book. So I highly recommend this one if you're interested in science or nature or birds or just really good writing. Doris is doing a summer school readathon on her channel in July, and she's inviting everyone to learn something new in July. This is a great book to pick up if you want to learn about birds. So that was that. I also read some Caribbean fiction preparing for Caribathon, which already happened in June, but all month we're reading Caribbean. We're using the Read Caribbean hashtag on Instagram, and in preparation I read a few books by Jamaican authors. I read Augustown by Kei Miller, and this one was fascinating. I'm highly recommending it. It does have some violent scenes and graphic language, but the book is just so much more than the use of language and those scenes. So if you're not that bothered by that, then I definitely recommend that you check out Kei Miller's book. In this one, he presents some of the cultural intricacies of Jamaica, where he presents the Rastafarian culture and how Rastafarian people have been persecuted by police. It's not just about Rastafarian culture, it's about culture, it's about identity, it's about life and the right to live the way you want to. So this is really a civil rights activist book. Highly recommend Augustown by Kei Miller, and I'm now trying to read everything that he has published, so look out for me talking about more books by Kei Miller pretty soon. I also read a short story collection which is for middle grade age. This is A Thief in the Village and Other Stories of Jamaica by James Berry. James Berry was a Jamaican who moved to England in the mid 1900s, and some of these I suppose were written remembering his childhood, and so here we get a presentation of Jamaica through the eyes of children. Highly recommend this one if you want to introduce Jamaican reading or Caribbean reading, Caribbean literature to someone of this age group. But also, if you just want to read something that is rated G, Caribbean fiction, G-rated. I didn't finish reading this until June 2nd, but it was a big book, and I read most of it in May, so I'm including it in my May recap just because I can. The Splendid and the Val by Erik Larson. I buddy read this with Patrice and Doris and Heidi. This was about Winston Churchill's prime ministership. He was the Prime Minister of England during World War II. And this focused on his first year in leadership and what it was like, how he was chosen, why he was chosen, and shows us the intimate details of what happened in that first year. So not just a historical perspective as in what went down in the history books, but also we're learning about the times through the personal recollections of people who were living at this time. And so Larson presents a lot of writing gleaned from people's diaries, people who kept diaries and people who were paid as observationists during this time. And we're learning from Churchill's perspective, we're learning from his daughter's perspective, we're getting letters that his wife wrote to diplomats who traveled. We're learning about Churchill trying to court FDR, Roosevelt, the President of the United States at that time, if you're not familiar with that history. Trying to court FDR, trying to get the United States to join the war with them. And this is fascinating, it's heartbreaking, it's interesting. Highly recommend this book. And so those were the 16 books that I read in May. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below how your May reading was, which book made the biggest impression on you in your May reading, and how your June reading is going. So let's talk in the comments down below. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video, subscribe if you want to see more, and let's talk down there. So until next time, happy reading. Bye.